Hey, welcome in. Let the day fade out, and we'll ease into a quiet story from Greek mythology. Tonight, let's take a slow walk along the edges of the Greek world. Not the bright marble halls where the gods argue and feast, and not the tidy city squares where people pretend they're in control. I mean the places where the road narrows, where the light runs out, where the sea starts to sound like it's breathing. Because that's where Greek myth likes to put its monsters. And in these stories, a monster isn't always just a big animal with too many teeth. Sometimes it's a warning, sometimes it's a boundary, sometimes it's a question nobody wants to answer. So before we meet any of the famous names, before we hear the clink of a hero's armor or the snap of a serpent's jaws, we're going to do something simple. We're going to understand what Greek monsters are for. And as you listen, you can let your mind build the landscape, a coastline under moonlight. A black cave mouth in a hillside, a marsh where the reeds whisper even when there's no wind, a narrow strait where the current pulls like a hand. Greek mythology is full of monsters, but it's also full of maps. Not paper maps, with neat borders and straight lines, more like emotional maps, where danger has a shape and fear has an address. In Greek, one of the words that gets translated as monster is teras, a marvel, a portent, a sign that something is out of place. A teras can be terrifying, but it can also be astonishing, something that forces you to stop and stare and feel in your bones that the world has more rules than you were taught. That's an important idea to hold on to. Because many Greek monsters are not random. They appear where the world is thin, where the normal order fails, or where humans cross into territory that doesn't belong to them. They live at thresholds. And Greek myths love thresholds. A threshold can be as small as a doorway, or as wide as the sea. It can be the moment between boyhood and adulthood, or the line between life and death. It can be the boundary between the tame and the wild, the civilized and the untamed. Monsters, in this tradition, often stand right on that line, like living gateposts. Sometimes they guard something, a sacred place, a forbidden prize, a path that should not be taken lightly. Sometimes they punish someone who breaks an oath or who tries to cheat fate. And sometimes they simply exist as proof that the world is bigger than a person's plans. That's why so many monster stories feel like travel stories. You don't meet Scylla and Charybdis in the center of town. You meet them in the straits, where there's no room to breathe and no safe choice. You don't meet the Hydra at a banquet. You meet it in a swamp, in a place that seems half alive and half rotten, where the water looks calm but hides its own hunger. You don't meet the Minotaur in a meadow. You meet it inside a labyrinth, an invention that turns space itself into a weapon. The locations are part of the creature. In a lot of modern stories, monsters are characters with personalities. In Greek myth, a monster is often also a situation, a problem with a heartbeat. And the Greek imagination had a special talent for giving problems a body. A plague becomes arrows from a god. A storm becomes a raging giant. A dangerous coastline becomes a sea dragon, a Ketos, rising like the sea's own nightmare. A maze of political debt and humiliation becomes a labyrinth, and inside it, a creature that looks like the consequences of somebody's mistake. So when we say monsters of Greek mythology, we're not just making a list of beasts. We're stepping into a worldview where danger is alive, and where the natural world can look back at you. That idea shows up in another word you'll hear in these stories, drekon. In later English, dragon can mean wings and fire and castles. But in Greek myth, a drekon is often a great serpent, sometimes a sea serpent, sometimes a land serpent, defined less by spectacle and more by watchfulness. A drekon is the kind of creature that doesn't blink. It's a guardian that sees. And that matters, because many monster tales revolve around how humans try to survive being seen. Think about the Gorgon, whose gaze turns bodies into stone. Think about the hero who uses reflection and indirect sight, because a straight look is too dangerous. Think about the sea monsters that hide until the last second, then appear, and in that brief moment of visibility, decide who lives and who vanishes. In Greek stories, vision is power, attention is power. And monsters often embody that power in a way humans can't match. Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, but what counts as a monster? That's a fair question, because Greek myth doesn't draw a simple line between monster and not monster. Multi-headed serpents, hybrid fire breathers, devourers of sailors, but some are more complicated. Centaurs, for example, can be wild and violent in some stories, and wise and civilized in others. Sirens can be portrayed as bird women in early art, and later imagined differently, but their danger is consistent. They lure you with voice and promise, and they leave bones. Even certain spirits, night haunters like Lamia or Empusa in later traditions, can be monstrous, not because they are giant, but because they hunt in the dark corners of the mind. So it helps to think of monster as a role. A monster is something that challenges the human order, sometimes by force, sometimes by temptation, sometimes by existing as a contradiction, part woman, part serpent, part lion, part goat, part snake. These mixed bodies are not random either. They're a physical way of saying, this does not fit. And when something does not fit, it becomes unsettling. Hybrids make the brain work harder. They refuse easy categories. They feel like the rules are bending. Greek myth uses that feeling on purpose. A chimera is not scary only because it breathes fire. It's scary because it's a denial of boundaries, predator and prey fused, land and serpent combined, a living sign that nature can be rearranged. And once you accept that nature can be rearranged, you also accept that a human life can be rearranged. That's where the dread comes from. Now, another pattern you'll notice is that monsters cluster in families. Not in the modern biological sense, but in mythic genealogy, the way stories connect different dangers to the same source. A brood of monsters might be traced back to sea deities like Phorcys and Ceto, which makes sense when you remember how ancient people experienced the sea: vast, unpredictable, full of things that surface once and then disappear. Another brood might be linked to Typhon and Echidna, a pairing that later poets and mythographers use as a kind of engine for monster making. When a tradition says these creatures are siblings, it's not always trying to teach you genetics. It's trying to teach you associations. It's saying these dangers belong to the same category of fear. And categories matter. Because Greek myths are a way of organizing chaos into stories you can remember. A story gives fear a name. A name gives fear an edge. And an edged thing can sometimes be faced. That's why so many monster tales are attached to heroes. A monster is a test, but the test isn't always physical. Sometimes it's about restraint. Sometimes it's about strategy. Sometimes it's about making a choice you hate, because every other choice is worse. There's a famous moment in the Odyssey where Odysseus has to pass between Scylla and Charybdis, between a rock monster that snatches sailors and a whirlpool that swallows the sea itself. The point of that story is not, look at the cool creatures. The point is that leadership sometimes means choosing the least fatal path. It means accepting loss and carrying it. That is a monster story. And notice how Greek myths often refuse to make monster slaying clean. Even when a hero wins, the story keeps a price tag attached. The victory becomes part of the hero's identity. The poison on an arrow. The skin worn like a uniform. The reputation that follows. The memory that doesn't fade. Monsters leave residue. They cling. Which is one reason they're so good for bedtime stories. Because even when you drift off, the mind keeps tracing the outlines. Now let's talk about the geography again, because it's not decoration, it's the stage where myth and reality overlap. Greek audiences lived with real dangers: wolves, boars, storms, shipwrecks, disease, famine. They also lived with real places that felt ominous, swamps that swallowed cattle, caves that seemed bottomless, rocky channels where currents fought each other like living things. So when a myth places a monster in a swamp or in a strait or in a cave, it's doing two things at once. It's giving you a supernatural story, and it's giving you a way to talk about a real hazard without needing a scientific explanation. A marsh is dangerous because it's easy to get stuck, easy to get sick, easy to disappear. A myth says a hydra lives there. A narrow channel is dangerous because ships can't maneuver and currents can pin you against rock. A myth says two monsters live there and you must choose. A labyrinth is dangerous because you can't trust your sense of direction. A myth says there is a bull-headed devourer inside and the walls are part of its hunger. This doesn't mean the Greeks were naive. It means they were imaginative. They saw patterns, and they gave them shapes. And those shapes became shared memory. Now, because this is Greek myth, we should also be honest about sources. There isn't a single, tidy, official version of most monster tales. You have early epic poetry, like Homer, where monsters often feel like raw forces of the world, less explained, more encountered. You have genealogical poetry like Hesiod, where monsters are part of the cosmic family tree, named and placed in lineages. You have later mythographers, like the author we call Pseudo-Apollodorus, who try to compile and organize many myths into a kind of reference library. And you have later poets and storytellers, including Roman writers, who sometimes add origin stories, motivations, and details that earlier sources leave silent. So as we move forward in this series, we'll stick to what can be supported as canon in the ancient tradition, and when a detail comes from a later variant, we'll treat it as a later variant, not as a secret truth, just as one more way the story was told. That matters with monsters more than you might expect, because monster tales are where later generations love to add explanations. People dislike mystery. If a monster exists, the mind wants to know why. So later traditions will say, this creature used to be a person, or this creature was punished, or this creature was made by a god for a reason. Sometimes those stories are compelling, and sometimes they're clearly a later attempt to make the world feel more orderly. But the earlier Greek monster often doesn't need a backstory to be terrifying. It is terrifying because it is there. It is terrifying because it turns a route into a gamble. Now, if you're still awake, and if your mind is still walking those shoreline paths with me, here's the shape of the journey we're beginning. We'll start with the roots, the parents and bloodlines that ancient sources use to connect the monstrous world. Then we'll move through kinds of fear. We'll visit monsters of stone and gaze, where one look can end you. We'll sink into wet places, where bodies multiply and the air itself feels toxic. We'll step into built spaces, where architecture becomes a predator. We'll rise into the air with winged threats that steal food, steal breath, steal attention. We'll drift out to sea, to straits and islands, where song can become a noose and currents can become teeth. And we'll end at the gates of the Underworld, where the most famous guardian is not there to chase the living, but to keep the dead where they belong. If you notice a pattern in all of that, it's this. Greek monsters do not simply roam. Many of them are stationed. They belong to a place, a function, a boundary. Even when a monster moves, it moves like a disaster moves, leaving a changed landscape behind it. So as we go, you can imagine the Greek world as a candle-lit map. Cities are warm points of light. Roads are thin threads of safety. And beyond them, the dark is not empty. It has names. And some of those names are famous: Gorgon, Hydra, Chimera, Minotaur, Siren, Scylla, Cerberus. But others are quieter, older, half-forgotten, spirits and shapes that move at night, stories told to children to keep them close to the fire. And that's the last thing to keep in mind before we truly begin. Greek monsters live in two places at once. They live in the landscape, and they live in the human nervous system. They are the feeling you get when you're alone on a road and you hear something behind you, and you can't quite tell whether it's wind or footstep or imagination. They are the moment you realize that the sea is deep enough to hide anything. They are the uneasy knowledge that you can be clever and brave and well-armed. And still be unlucky. The Gorgons do not arrive suddenly in Greek myth. They are already there, waiting at the far edge of the world, long before any hero is sent to confront them. Their story does not begin with Perseus. It begins with distance, with the idea that some horrors must live far away, so that the center of the world can pretend to be safe. Greek sources usually agree on the basic structure. There are 3 Gorgon sisters, Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa. 2 are immortal, 1 is not. That difference matters more than any detail about snakes or wings, because it is the reason a story can exist at all. The Gorgons are consistently placed at the edges of maps, beyond familiar coastlines, near the lands of night, close to where the sun sets. In early Greek imagination, the edge of the world is not empty. It is crowded with things that do not belong anywhere else. Monsters are pushed outward, not because they are weak, but because they are too dangerous to live near ordinary life. The Gorgons embody a specific kind of fear, the fear of being seen. Their most famous trait is their gaze. To look directly at a Gorgon is to lose motion, warmth, and life itself. Victims are not torn apart, they are stopped, frozen, turned into stone mid-action. The violence is instant and absolute. This matters because it means the Gorgons do not chase, hunt, or stalk. They do not need to. Their power activates at the moment of recognition. To know what you are seeing is already too late. Among the 3 sisters, Medusa stands apart. Unlike Stheno and Euryale, she can die. Greek sources are clear on this point even when they disagree on other details. Medusa's mortality is not treated as weakness, but as fate. She is the only one whose story can change. Later, Roman poets will add elaborate backstories, beauty, temples, punishments. But in earlier Greek tradition, Medusa is dangerous first and explains second. The myth does not require sympathy to function. What it requires is inevitability. The task of killing Medusa does not arise from heroism, it arises from politics. Perseus is sent after the Gorgon not because he volunteers, but because a king wants him gone. The demand is framed as a gift request, the head of Medusa. But it is understood by everyone involved to be a death sentence. The request is clever, precisely because it sounds polite. Perseus cannot succeed through strength. No one can approach a Gorgon head-on and live. The myth makes this clear early, so there is no confusion about the rules. To survive, Perseus must rely on tools. Divine assistance enters the story here, but not as a shortcut. Each gift solves a specific problem. Winged sandals allow approach and escape. A special bag allows the head to be carried without killing the bearer. A curved blade allows a clean strike. Most importantly, a polished shield allows Perseus to see without seeing. The shield is the heart of the story. Perseus does not confront Medusa directly. He approaches her reflection. He watches movement without meeting eyes. He acts indirectly, trusting an image rather than reality. This is not cowardice. It is intelligence adapted to horror. Medusa is killed while sleeping. This detail appears in many accounts and matters for tone. The myth does not present the act as a duel. There is no exchange of blows, no moment of mutual recognition. The danger is too great for fairness. When Perseus strikes, the story does not end. From Medusa's severed neck spring Pegasus and Chrysaor, beings that feel out of place in a death scene. Their birth suggests that Medusa was never just a monster, but a junction point, a place where other forces were trapped. Pegasus in particular will go on to reshape other myths entirely. This is one of the quiet patterns of Greek storytelling. Killing a monster often releases something new into the world, not all of it predictable. Medusa's head remains dangerous even in death. Perseus carries it as a weapon, turning it toward enemies who never see Medusa herself. Entire armies are immobilized without understanding what struck them. Kings are ended without a blade touching skin. The power of the Gorgon outlives the Gorgon. Eventually, the head is fixed onto a shield or placed in divine custody, depending on the source. The implication is the same either way. Some dangers cannot be destroyed, only contained. The Gorgons endure in Greek imagination because they represent a fear that cannot be reasoned with. You cannot bargain with a gaze, you cannot outfight it. You cannot outrun it once contact is made. The only solution is distance, reflection, and restraint. That lesson echoes across later monster stories. Heroes who charge directly tend to die. Heroes who learn to approach indirectly sometimes live long enough to regret it. With the Gorgons, Greek myth establishes a rule that will repeat again and again. Not every monster is meant to be faced head-on. Once Greek myth moves past origins, monsters stop being distant facts of the world and become immediate problems. They block roads, they poison land, they make ordinary life impossible. These are not creatures encountered by accident. They are faced because something has gone wrong, and someone must be sent to deal with it. Land monsters, in particular, are remembered as local disasters. Their stories are anchored to specific regions: a swamp, a valley, a mountain pass. And the people who live nearby do not debate what the monster means. They debate how long they can survive while it remains. This is where the idea of the hero's work truly takes shape. Not glory, not adventure, containment, removal. Making a place livable again. Among these stories, a pattern emerges quickly. No two monsters demand the same solution. Strength fails where fire is needed. Weapons fail where wrestling is required. Strategy matters more than courage. The Lernian Hydra embodies this lesson more clearly than almost any other creature in Greek myth. The Hydra lives near the swamps of Lerna, a place already associated with decay, stagnant water, and dangerous ground. Wetlands were not romantic locations for the Greeks. They were breeding grounds for disease, rot, and disappearance. The Hydra does not invade a healthy landscape. It grows out of an unhealthy one. Descriptions of the Hydra emphasize multiplicity. It has many heads. The exact number varies by source, and when one is cut off, two more grow in its place. This is not a monster that can be worn down through effort. Every successful strike makes the situation worse. This detail matters because it reframes violence itself as a liability. Against the Hydra, doing what a hero is expected to do, striking decisively, accelerates failure. The Hydra's blood is poisonous. Its breath is toxic. Even approaching it carries risk. The creature does not merely kill through force, it contaminates its surroundings. In this way, it functions like a spreading disaster rather than a single enemy. Heracles is sent to destroy the Hydra not as an isolated feat, but as part of a broader obligation to restore order. Yet even he cannot solve the problem alone. As Heracles cuts off heads and watches them multiply, the myth makes a critical shift. Another figure enters the story, Iolaus. He is not stronger than Heracles. He does not land the killing blow. What he brings instead is insight. Iolaus cauterizes the Hydra's necks as they are severed. Fire halts regeneration. For the first time, progress becomes possible. This moment quietly breaks one of the strongest heroic myths, that greatness is solitary. Against certain monsters, teamwork is not optional. It is the only way forward. The Hydra is ultimately killed, but its influence does not end there. Heracles dips his arrows into its poisonous blood, carrying the Hydra's power into later stories. Even in death, the monster continues to shape outcomes. The lesson of the Hydra is blunt. Some problems worsen the more aggressively you attack them. Without understanding the system that sustains them, effort alone is useless. If the Hydra represents regeneration and contamination, the Nemean lion represents the opposite problem, invulnerability. The lion terrorizes the region of Nemea, preying on people and livestock. It is not subtle, it does not hide, its dominance is total. Weapons fail against it. Spears shatter, arrows bounce harmlessly away, the lion's hide cannot be pierced. This is not simply a test of strength, it is a test of assumptions. The normal tools of heroism are revealed to be decorative. Heracles is forced into direct physical confrontation. He traps the lion in a confined space and strangles it with his bare hands. The act is brutal, close, and dangerous in a way no weapon-based fight could be. Afterward, Heracles skins the lion and wears its hide. This is not vanity. The skin becomes armor, marking him permanently. The monster is not erased, it is integrated. The Nemean lion teaches a different lesson from the Hydra. Some threats cannot be outsmarted or circumvented. They must be faced directly, without distance or protection. Where the lion is invulnerable, the Erymanthian boar is unstoppable. The boar ravages the countryside, destroying crops and settlements. It is not magical in the same sense as other monsters. It is simply overwhelming. Heracles does not kill it immediately. Instead, he exhausts it, driving it into snow and rough terrain until it can no longer fight back. This story reframes victory as patience. The hero wins not by striking harder, but by controlling the environment. The monster is beaten through attrition rather than force. The boar's story reinforces an uncomfortable truth. Not every threat is unnatural. Some are simply larger, stronger versions of familiar dangers. The Stymphalian birds introduce yet another category of monster, the swarm. These birds infest the area around Lake Stymphalus. They are numerous, aggressive, and destructive. Facing them one by one would be pointless. Instead, Heracles uses noise to drive them into the air, scattering them and making them vulnerable. Again, the solution is indirect. The birds matter because they demonstrate scale. A single enemy can be confronted. A mass requires disruption. Taken together, these land monsters form a catalog of threat types. The Hydra shows what happens when damage multiplies. The lion shows what happens when force is useless. The boar shows what happens when endurance is required. The birds show what happens when numbers overwhelm. Greek myth does not present these encounters as interchangeable trials. Each one exists to prove that heroism is not a single trait, it is adaptability. Importantly, these monsters do not roam endlessly. They are rooted to places. Once removed, the land can heal, roads reopen, fields recover, people return. This is why their stories persist. They are not abstract battles between good and evil. They are narratives of repair. But not all monsters exist in the open. Some are hidden behind walls, beneath cities, or inside structures built by human hands. Unlike the monsters that poison swamps or stalk valleys, the Minotaur does not emerge from wilderness. It lives at the center of power. It is contained, fed, and maintained by a king. Its existence is not an accident of nature, but the result of human decisions layered over divine consequences. The Minotaur's story is inseparable from Crete, from kingship, and from the idea that some monsters are *built*, not born. The chain begins with Minos, ruler of Crete, who seeks unquestioned authority. When divine favor is offered in the form of a magnificent bull rising from the sea, Minos accepts the sign but rejects the obligation that comes with it. He keeps what was meant to be surrendered. In Greek myth, broken vows do not fade quietly, they warp reality. The punishment does not strike Minos directly. Instead, it turns inward. His wife, Pasiphae, is overcome with unnatural desire for the bull. The myth does not linger on emotion or justification. It treats the outcome as inevitable once the boundary is crossed. From this union comes the Minotaur, a creature with a human body and a bull's head. It is not feral in the usual sense. It is violent, powerful, and uncontrollable, but it is also trapped. The monster does not roam the land. It is hidden away. To contain the Minotaur, Minos turns to Daedalus, the greatest craftsman of his age. What Daedalus creates is not a cage, but a system. The labyrinth is designed to defeat memory. Its corridors twist back on themselves. Landmarks repeat. Direction loses meaning. Even those who build it cannot reliably escape it without guidance. This matters because the labyrinth is more than a setting. It is a weapon. Anyone sent inside is not meant to fight. They are meant to wander, weaken, and eventually be found by the monster. The structure does the work before the Minotaur ever strikes. To feed the Minotaur, Minos imposes a brutal demand on Athens, a regular tribute of young men and women sent into the labyrinth to die. This is not framed as religious devotion. It is political domination. The monster becomes an instrument of humiliation. The victims are not criminals. They are offerings meant to remind Athens of its subjugation. This arrangement reveals a core truth of the myth. The Minotaur is not the only monster in the story. When Theseus arrives in Crete, he does not come as a random hero. He comes as a volunteer. His choice to enter the labyrinth is an act of defiance, not destiny. Ariadne, Minos' daughter, sees what the system is designed to do. She understands that strength alone will not defeat it. Her solution is not a weapon, but a method. The thread she gives Theseus is simple. It does not guide him to victory. It only ensures he can return. This distinction matters. Inside the labyrinth, the myth grows quiet. Ancient sources do not describe a dramatic chase or prolonged battle. The focus remains on disorientation, enclosure, and inevitability. When Theseus encounters the Minotaur, the fight is direct and final. Some versions emphasize weapons. Others emphasize brute force. What remains consistent is that the monster, for all its strength, cannot compensate for confinement. The Minotaur dies not because it is weak, but because it is trapped in a system designed to consume both hunter and prey. Escape is not guaranteed even after victory. Without Ariadne's thread, Theseus would have died inside the structure that made the monster lethal. The aftermath of the story refuses to settle into triumph. Ariadne is abandoned. Theseus forgets to change his sails. A king dies because of an oversight born from exhaustion and grief. The myth does not reward success with harmony. It shows cost rippling outward. In some traditions, Crete's monstrous legacy does not end with the Minotaur. Other threats linger. Talos, a bronze giant, circles the island's shores, enforcing isolation with mechanical precision. He does not think. He does not tire. He exists solely to repel intrusion. The Cretan bull roams freely after the Minotaur's death, a reminder that suppressing one disaster does not erase the forces that produced it. Together, these figures reinforce the same idea. Crete's monsters are bound to control, architecture, and power. The Minotaur stands apart from earlier beasts because it reveals something unsettling. Monsters do not always live beyond civilization. Sometimes they live at its center, sustained by systems meant to protect authority. And sometimes the most dangerous part of the monster is not its strength, but the maze built to justify its existence. After Crete, Greek myth shifts away from enclosed horrors and returns to open land and sky. The next monster cannot be trapped in corridors or starve behind walls. It dominates space itself. To face it, the hero must leave the ground. The Chimera is described as a creature made from incompatible parts, a lion at the front, a goat rising from its back, and a serpent forming its tail. Fire pours from its mouth. Nothing about it resolves into a single shape. It is not an exaggeration of nature. It is a rejection of it. This matters because Greek monsters usually distort something familiar. The Chimera does not distort one thing. It combines several, forcing the mind to hold contradictions at once. Teeth meant for flesh, horns meant for ramming, coils meant for constriction, and fire meant to erase distance, all occupy the same body. The result is paralysis. You cannot decide how to approach the Chimera because there is no correct approach. The Chimera ravages the countryside of Lycia. Like earlier land monsters, it is remembered as a local disaster. Fields burn, herds vanish, roads become impassable. The threat is not symbolic. It is economic. physical, and immediate. The task of killing the Chimera falls to Bellerophon, not because he seeks it, but because he is set up to fail. Bellerophon arrives at the court of a king, who sees him as a problem. Rather than execute him openly, the king sends him against the Chimera, framing the command as an honor. As with Medusa, the request is lethal because it is polite. The assumption is simple: no one can kill the Chimera. Fire cannot be faced. Hybrid anatomy cannot be predicted. Distance is meaningless when flame can reach you before steel can reach it. What changes the equation is Pegasus. Pegasus is not just a mount. He is altitude made alive. With him, Bellerophon escapes the plane on which the Chimera dominates. The battle does not happen on the ground, because the ground belongs to the monster. This is a recurring rule in Greek myth. Monsters control their chosen terrain. Victory requires removing yourself from it. From the air, the Chimera's advantages collapse. Its fire reaches upward, but not far enough. Its body cannot reorient quickly. Its hybrid form, once terrifying, becomes awkward. Different sources describe the kill differently. Some emphasize lead-tipped weapons melting in the Chimera's fire and choking it. Others focus on repeated strikes from above. What matters is not the method, but the principle. The Chimera is defeated by asterisk, nemino wepatis, and height, asterisk, not strength. This encounter reveals why hybrid monsters are so unsettling. They resist prediction. A hero cannot rely on experience with a single animal or threat type. Against the Chimera, pattern recognition fails. Greek myth returns to hybrid bodies repeatedly because they represent systems that cannot be understood by breaking them into parts. Each component behaves logically on its own. Together, they create chaos. Centaurs occupy a related but distinct space in this logic. They are half human, half horse, and oscillate between civilization and violence. Some are teachers, others are uncontrollable. Their monstrosity is conditional. Satyrs function similarly. They are boundary creatures, not monsters in the same sense as the Chimera, but reminders that blending categories destabilizes order. The Chimera, however, offers no such ambiguity. It does not teach, it does not negotiate, it destroys. After its death, the land recovers, roads reopen. Trade resumes. The myth emphasizes restoration, not celebration. Bellerophon's story does not end cleanly. Later myths will show that surviving monsters does not grant immunity from pride or collapse. Greek storytelling is consistent on this point. Killing a monster does not make you safe from yourself. The Chimera matters because it teaches a hard boundary. Some threats cannot be met where they stand. Some systems cannot be fixed from inside. You must rise above them. After the Chimera, Greek myth turns toward monsters that do not wander or devastate indiscriminately. These creatures stay where they are placed. They guard. Their violence is not chaotic. It is conditional. These monsters exist to prevent access. They do not rule territory the way kings do. They lock it. They make certain places unreachable, certain objects untouchable, and certain knowledge unavailable until the world itself changes. In Greek myth, this role belongs most often to dragons, creatures whose defining trait is not fire but vigilance. The earliest and most important of these guardians is Python. Python dwells at Delphi, a place already heavy with meaning before any god claims it. The site is tied to prophecy, to voices rising from the earth, to truths that cannot be forced. Python does not roam. It coils around the sacred center. In early tradition, Python is not described as evil. It is ancient. It belongs to the place as much as the rock and the vapor. Its presence signals that access to prophecy is not free. When Python is slain, the act is not presented as a simple victory over a monster. It is a transfer of authority. Control of the sacred site changes hands. The guardian is removed so that a new order can speak. Importantly, the myth preserves the tension. The slaying of Python requires purification afterward. Killing a guardian has consequences, even when it is permitted. This establishes a rule that will repeat. Monsters that guard sacred ground are not mistakes. They are systems of protection. Far to the west, at the edge of the world, another guardian coils around something forbidden. Ladon watches over the garden of the Hesperides, where golden apples grow. These apples are not food. They are symbols of permanence, abundance, and divine privilege. They do not belong in the human world. Ladon never sleeps. Unlike monsters defeated through exhaustion or deception, Ladon's defining feature is vigilance. There is no moment when the guard drops. Time itself becomes an obstacle. Different sources describe Ladon's lineage differently, but they agree on function. The dragon is there so that the apples cannot be taken casually. Any attempt must be extraordinary. When Heracles approaches the garden, the problem is not combat alone. It is access. The monstrous presence ensures that even heroes must negotiate, deceive, or temporarily shift responsibility. Whether Heracles kills Ladon directly or circumvents him through trickery varies by tradition. What does not change is the meaning. The apples are removed only because the structure guarding them is disrupted. Once again, the land is altered by the removal of its guardian. The pattern repeats farther east with the Colchian dragon. This dragon guards the Golden Fleece, an object bound to kingship, legitimacy, and inheritance. Like Ladon, the Colchian dragon does not pursue, it watches. Its defining trait is sleeplessness. It does not tire, it does not blink. No amount of patience will create an opening. This forces a different solution. The guardian cannot be overcome through strength or endurance. It must be neutralized indirectly. In many accounts, this is achieved through enchantment rather than violence. The dragon is lulled into stillness long enough for the prize to be taken. This detail matters. Greek myth draws a line between monsters meant to be destroyed and monsters meant to be bypassed. Guardians fall into the second category more often than not. Taken together, these dragons reveal a consistent logic. They are placed where something must not be reached easily. They do not judge who is worthy, they enforce delay. They ensure that access requires transformation, whether ritual, trickery, assistance, or consequence. This is why Greek dragons are described as watchers rather than conquerors. Their power lies in refusal. When they are removed, the world changes. Prophecy becomes centralized. Divine objects enter circulation. Boundaries weaken. Greek myth understands that not every monster is an enemy. Some are locks. And opening what they guard always carries a cost. After guardians in locked places, Greek myth turns toward a different kind of threat. These monsters do not block roads or guard prizes. They interrupt movement itself. They attack through sound, distraction, and sudden descent. You do not meet them head-on. You stumble into them. Monsters of the air are defined by instability. They are difficult to see clearly, difficult to corner, and difficult to predict. Their danger does not come from size or strength alone, but from timing. They strike when attention slips. The most famous of these are the Sirens. In early Greek tradition, the Sirens are not depicted as seductive mermaids lounging on rocks. They are creatures of voice. Their physical form varies by source, often described as part woman and part bird, but the shape is secondary to the sound. What the Sirens offer is not pleasure, it is knowledge. They promise understanding, memory, and truth. Their song claims to reveal everything a listener has ever wanted to know: the causes of suffering, the shape of destiny, the meaning of past choices. This is why their victims do not struggle. Sailors do not leap into the sea in panic. They steer toward the sound willingly. The danger lies in recognition. The moment a listener believes the song is meant specifically for them, movement stops, oars slow, ships drift, the rocks do the rest. The Sirens do not pursue ships that pass safely. They do not adapt their strategy. They wait, sing, and trust that eventually someone will listen. When Odysseus approaches their island, the myth introduces a rare moment of controlled exposure. He wants to hear the song without dying. The solution is restraint. Odysseus orders his crew to seal their ears with wax. He alone is bound to the mast, unable to act on what he hears. The choice is deliberate. He does not rely on strength or speed, but on pre-commitment. This matters because it reframes heroism. Survival comes from limiting one's own freedom before temptation appears. As the ship passes, Odysseus begs to be released. He commands, he pleads. The crew cannot hear him. The system holds. The Sirens are defeated not by silence, but by refusal to respond. Later traditions sometimes claim the Sirens die when their song fails, but early Greek sources do not require this. The threat ends when attention is withheld. The Sirens reveal a specific vulnerability in human behavior, the desire to understand everything, even at the cost of safety. Where the Sirens use voice to lure, the Harpies use wings to disrupt. The Harpies are sudden and violent. They do not negotiate. They arrive without warning, steal food, foul what remains, and vanish into the air. They represent a different fear, not temptation, but deprivation. In myth, the Harpies often punish those who have already offended the order of the world. Their attacks are repetitive and humiliating. Every attempt at restoration is undone. The cruelty lies in timing. The Harpies strike just as relief arrives. Just as hunger might end, it begins again. Unlike grounded monsters, Harpies cannot be fenced out or confronted directly. They escape upward, leaving only damage behind. What unites Sirens and Harpies is not appearance, but method. Both exploit moments of vulnerability. Sirens strike curiosity. Harpies strike need. They are monsters of interruption. They force travelers to confront an uncomfortable truth. Danger does not always announce itself through force. Sometimes it arrives as a choice, sometimes as a delay, sometimes as a momentary lapse. Greek myth treats these threats seriously because they mirror everyday risk. Not every disaster is dramatic. Some are quiet and cumulative. The lesson repeats across these stories. Do not trust every voice. Do not assume you will react rationally under pressure. Do not believe that awareness alone is protection. Against monsters of air and sound, preparation matters more than reaction. Some monsters do not wait in one place or strike through temptation. Some are positioned so that escape itself becomes impossible. The danger does not lie in choosing poorly. It lies in having to choose at all. Scylla and Charybdis occupy a narrow strait, a passage so tight that avoiding both is impossible. Sail too far from one, and you are pulled into the other. The sea itself becomes a corridor with teeth. This is not accidental geography. Greek myth places these two monsters together deliberately. Their power emerges only in relation to one another. Charybdis is not described with a body in the way other monsters are. She is a force. 3 times a day, she swallows the sea itself, dragging ships, sailors, and debris into a spiraling void before vomiting the water back out. There is no fighting Charybdis. No weapon can reach her. No strength can resist her pull. She represents total loss, the kind that leaves nothing behind to mourn. Scylla is different. She clings to rock, half hidden in stone. Her upper form appears almost calm, even familiar from a distance, but below are snapping jaws. 6 of them, each seizing a victim in an instant. Scylla does not sink ships. She plucks sailors from them. This distinction matters. Charybdis destroys everything. Scylla takes something. When Odysseus approaches the strait, the problem is not ignorance. He knows what waits. He has been warned. The tragedy is not surprise, but certainty. Sailing closer to Scylla means death for a few. Sailing closer to Charybdis means death for all. Odysseus chooses Scylla. The myth does not soften this decision. Odysseus does not announce it to his crew. He does not ask for consent. Leadership here means choosing loss deliberately. As the ship passes, Scylla strikes with speed and precision. There is no struggle. The sailors vanish upward, taken alive and screaming. The ship continues forward. This is one of the most unsettling moments in Greek myth because it refuses heroism. No clever trick saves everyone. No sacrifice is volunteered. Survival is achieved by calculation. Later traditions will offer origin stories for Scylla, transformations, betrayals, punishments. but these explanations come after the fact. In the earliest accounts, Scylla simply is. Her presence does not need justification. Scylla and Charybdis endure because they mirror reality Greek audiences understood well. Some situations do not offer clean outcomes. Some passages demand loss as the price of continuation. The strait becomes a symbol, but it is grounded in lived experience. Ancient sailors faced narrow channels, violent currents, and lethal rocks. Myth does not exaggerate the danger, it gives it a name. This pairing also reinforces a larger pattern in Greek storytelling. Monsters are not always enemies to be defeated. Sometimes they are conditions. The lesson of the strait is not bravery or strength, it is judgment under pressure. You cannot wait for a better option. You cannot turn back. You move forward knowing the cost. After monsters of choice and passage, Greek myth descends to a different kind of boundary, one that cannot be sailed past or reasoned with. This is the line between life and death. At this boundary stands Cerberus. Cerberus is not a roaming terror. He does not hunt the living, raid cities, or poison land. He waits. His task is singular and absolute. Nothing that enters the underworld is allowed to leave. Descriptions of Cerberus vary across sources. He is most often portrayed as a massive dog with multiple heads, a serpent's tail, and sometimes snakes rising from his back. The exact number of heads changes with the storyteller. The function does not. Cerberus is a threshold monster. He does not enforce morality. He does not judge souls. He enforces direction. This distinction matters. In Greek thought, the horror of death is not punishment, it is permanence. Cerberus exists to make that permanence real. The underworld does not need walls or gates. It has a guardian whose presence alone is enough to prevent escape. Most souls never encounter Cerberus as an enemy. They pass him once, moving inward. He becomes dangerous only when the natural order is challenged. This is why Cerberus enters the heroic cycle only when someone attempts the impossible. Heracles' descent into the underworld is not framed as rebellion. It is a task imposed from outside, a demand meant to break him. The condition is clear. He must bring Cerberus back alive. No weapons are permitted. This rule transforms the encounter. Cerberus cannot be slain. He cannot be tricked away from his post permanently. He must be confronted and subdued. Heracles wrestles the monster, using only strength and endurance, overcoming not just force, but terror. The struggle is not described in detail because the point is not spectacle, it is violation. For a moment, the boundary fails. Cerberus is brought into the world of the living, and the reaction is immediate. Kings recoil. The sight of the underworld's guardian outside his place is unbearable. The monster must be returned. This return is critical. Greek myth does not allow permanent theft from death. Even when boundaries are crossed, they are restored. Cerberus resumes his position. The order of the world closes again. Cerberus is not alone in this role. Greek myth repeatedly places monsters at thresholds, cave mouths, river crossings, gates, and borders. These creatures do not exist to test skill, but resolve. Crossing a threshold always carries risk because it threatens stability. Unlike earlier monsters, Cerberus does not leave a healed land behind when encountered. Nothing improves because nothing was broken. His presence is not a problem to solve. This is what makes threshold monsters unsettling. They are correct. They do exactly what they are meant to do. Greek myth uses Cerberus to make a final statement about monstrosity. Some creatures are not errors in the world. They are supports. Remove them permanently, and the structure collapses. After Cerberus, Greek myth does not introduce another monster. It does not escalate. Instead, it pauses. This is intentional. By the time the stories reach the gates of the underworld, the audience has already seen every major form a monster can take. Some poison land. Some guard sacred things. Some tempt, ambush, or force impossible choices. Some simply stand where they must and refuse to move. What remains is not another threat, but a pattern. Greek monsters persist because they do specific work in the world. They are not random horrors inserted for drama. Each one marks a boundary that cannot be crossed casually. Some monsters mark asterisk geographic borders. Swamps, narrow straits, caves, cliffs, and far-off edges of the map become dangerous not because they are unknown, but because they are known to be lethal. Monsters give these places memory. They explain why people do not go there. Some monsters mark asterisk social borders. The Minotaur enforces domination through ritualized sacrifice. The Sphinx kills those who cannot think their way forward. These creatures punish failure to meet expectations imposed by power. Some monsters mark asterisk psychological borders Gallensparum. The Sirens exploit curiosity. Scylla forces choice. Charybdis erases hesitation entirely. These stories are not about strength. They are about limits. How much loss a person can carry and still move forward. Some monsters mark asterisk, not cosmic borders. Cerberus enforces the final division between life and death. Python guards prophecy. Dragons coil around objects meant to remain unreachable. These monsters protect structure itself. What unites them is restraint. Greek myth does not celebrate endless conquest. Heroes are allowed to remove monsters only when something is broken. Even then, the victory is narrow. Land heals, but cost remains. Order returns, but it is never expanded without consequence. This is why monsters are not wiped from the world all at once. Each one belongs to a specific place, moment, and imbalance. Killing every monster would not create safety. It would create collapse. Greek storytelling understands that fear has a function. It keeps people from crossing lines they are not ready to cross. Monsters embody that function so it can be seen, named, and remembered. This is also why later cultures never discard these creatures. They reuse them. Medusa becomes a symbol of deadly recognition. The Minotaur becomes a warning about systems built to consume. The Hydra becomes a metaphor for problems that multiply under pressure. Scylla and Charybdis become shorthand for forced loss. Cerberus becomes the image of finality itself. These figures survive because the conditions they represent do not disappear. Greek myth does not ask the listener to conquer fear. It asks them to asterisk respect it. The monsters remain so that borders remain visible. And when the stories are told slowly, in the dark, they serve one last purpose. They remind us that danger has shape, that limits can be learned, and that even the most terrifying things in the world have a place. If these stories helped you wind down or drift toward sleep, you're in the right place. Subscribe for more slow mythology, and if you enjoyed this, tap like and leave a comment with the next figure you want to hear about. Good night.